Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, Nancy's trying to figure out the whole situation between Tiffany and, Lucy, because obviously it's like, okay, so Tiffany was being haunted by Lucy, but for what, trying to understand that connection. Then there's the whole thing about Lucy's mom showing up at, the restaurant and everything, because apparently she worked there in like the 90s and stuff like that. And obviously, so it's like, and it is interesting because like the last time Nancy came across her, circumstances were a little differently in her behavior, but now I think because she's more so in that mindset, kind of back in the day. So I'm surprised like George didn't say anything. I mean, maybe she said something kind of in between like moments, but it's like we never actually got to see George handle it. It's just kind of like I guess she's not hurting anyone, so we'll just kind of let her do anything, because I guess they're like, if we kind of bother her, kind of stop her from kind of snap her out of this, she might kind of freak out. So they just kind of left it at that. Obviously, we have Laura's return. She's much better now, and she's wanting to kind of have a more zen approach to everything. She's let this murder kind of like control her for too long, so she's like, no, I'm not gonna let all this negativity affect my life. Nick's apologizing because he's like, I promised to take care of you because I made that promise to Tiffany, but Laura's like, the fact of the matter is I don't need all this negativity, so it's all good. So then it turns into a situation of Nancy kind of breaking down everything, and which even George is like, why are we literally doing murder stuff in the restaurant right now? And it's like Nancy's kind of explaining everything, and because Lucy's mom's over there, she's kind of having to beat around the bush about everything that's going down. It's like, okay, like, let's talk around Lucy's murder. But it's like, okay, so, but then Lucy, the moment they start bringing stuff up, like Lucy kind of knocks down all the pictures except for one. So that ends up being what kind of spirals everything. Nick went to go pick up Josh because his mom had stolen the car from him and drove to the restaurant and kind of left him on the outskirts of town. Obviously, Josh is talking about getting his mom to a new place, but it would mean shutting down the garage and everything. So Nick would have to find somewhere not only to work, somewhere else to work, but also somewhere else to live. So, but it's also it's not that much of an element, but the whole thing is too. Like, let's not forget, Nick is supposed to be kind of making. I mean, obviously him buying up, being one of the bosses of the restaurant and everything, co-owners of the restaurant, that was kind of him taking that direction of kind of like figuring out what he wants to do with his life. So I guess this kind of presents another opportunity at that. But nevertheless, so Nancy decides to kind of, take Laura and Ace with her to investigate this, whole situation, because they're trying to find out where, Tiffany, like, where was some of her last locations. So they go and obviously have to talk to Karen, but, it turns into that thing of Nancy being pissed because it's like, oh yeah, like, yeah, I might have gathered the evidence that, ended up demonizing my dad as a killer, but you went snooping. It's like, at the same time, it's like, it's that technicality as a cop of like, well, it was out in the open, but it's like, why were you snooping in Nancy's room in the first place? Like, you were kind of out of line. You're kind of out of line, but at the same time, it's like, it's a complicated thing of like, yeah, you were doing your job, and Nancy probably would be able to appreciate that if it wasn't the circumstances of you basically indicting her dad, saying that he's the one that's behind all, so it's that whole thing. And I love that Nancy was about to kind of go off, but Ace was like, that's a perfect segue about, Lucy's murder and everything. So we're trying to find out, where Tiffany's movements were up to the point that she had died and everything. And so, but we end up finding out like, oh, Tiffany had actually lied about her location. Basically, she felt like someone was following her, so she kind of goes out of her way to go to places, leaves her car and her phone there to make it seem like, oh, this is where she was, where she can actually go somewhere else. Like the psychic she went to go see, making it seem like she was going to a spa, and so on and so forth. But then it's like, oh yeah, she went to a library, and Ace is like, oh yeah, there's something around this other place. It was like, well, there's a library, and it's like, okay, so we're gonna go to the library. Ace is like, no, I can't go there. My enemies are there. And I had to rewind it. I was like, did he literally say his enemies? It's like he said his enemies are there. So Nancy kind of brings them there anyway. But what's interesting is we meet, it was kind of interesting because like, I like that this episode, we also kind of learned quite a bit about Ace, interestingly enough. Well, because the fact of the matter is we learned that the library, his mom actually works there. And it's like, oh, his mom's not there, but Dominique is. And it turns out Dominique's his nemesis. And it's like, we don't need your help specifically. We need someone who works here's help, so it doesn't necessarily have to be you, Dominique, but it ends up being Dominique. And I love the whole thing of like the kind of back and forth and stuff like that. He's like, yeah, the camera systems, you're lucky we keep them for like our records for a year. He's like, actually, that's thanks to my mom because I'm the one that gave her the suggestion. And Nancy kind of looks at him and he's like, after the first season of Serial, I got a little on edge. So that's what kind of became the byproduct of this. And then there's the whole thing of like, the back and forth of like, oh, like, I forgot, it was some game they were playing, and apparently he was like, you cheated. She's like, it's hacking, there's no cheating in hacking. And then it's like, oh, like, she can find like photos and like she can find stuff in the frames of everything, and she's like, oh, you can't do that. He's like, well, not all of us went to school for this, some of us were some of us were gifted. And Ace looks to Nancy, he's like, I was self-taught and everything. I love that. And I just love that little back and forth between him and Dominique. And then over there at the computer, like Ace is kind of helping, kind of hack into everything. And he's like, actually, yeah, and we're done. And then it's like, he's like, yeah, but if Dominique asks, say that it was pretty difficult and I was pretty amazing. And I love that whole, back and forth. Because she'd also asked him, it's like, because basically he had to put a program in there to basically remember people's keystrokes. And even Nancy was like, why'd you do that? And Ace just kind of looks at her, I'm like, I want to know the reason why too. Why did you set that up in advance? But they went through, like, because Tiffany she went through some emails, and it turns out those emails she went through were Lucy's, and it's like back and forth between Lucy and Ryan, and there was back and forth, and obviously Ace was able to retrieve the message that was deleted, and it turns out it was saying like, oh, calling Lucy a whore, and that he'll never forgive her and stuff like that, and they were going to meet up somewhere. So it's like, okay, so they take this and they go back, and it's like, all right, so how are we going to handle this? Because you had Bess kind of kept looking at the picture. She's like, yeah, there's something here. Like, she kind of felt like there was a message there. And obviously it's like, it's like, oh, I'm gonna look for, like, Ace is like, I'm gonna look for some frames in it. And like, you look for, frames within the picture. And then Laura's like, what? It's like, and then Nancy just had to be like, yeah, it's something Ace learned from his nemesis at the library. And Ace just kind of look at Nancy like, why'd you even have to say anything? Don't bring my nemesis, bring up Dominique under this. I just love that he has a nemesis. I love that. But what I really liked is obviously they create like a false situation to lead Ryan there. And I actually love it. It's actually kind of a pretty dope aspect to this whole thing. It's like basically they bring Ryan there under false circumstances. And I love like Laura was about to get caught up in it. It's like, oh, what about the... And Nancy had to stop her. And then Ace was like, he was like, because Ryan was like, what about the what? And then Ace was like, yeah, it's nothing. No, man, you're totally super innocent. And so it's like Bess suggests, it's like, it's like, oh, we got to kind of, how about we literally reenact it? And George was like, no, it's like, no, like, we had to kind of go through like what went down at night. Nancy said it herself. And they literally repeat it and everything. And I even love it, like having them literally go, Ryan's like, wait, you literally want me to go outside? Yeah. And come back in. No, it's raining outside. Fine, and kind of goes along with it. And she's like, oh, we're close. And she goes back in her American accent, and Nancy's looking at her and she's like, what? Bess is like, that's the way I said it. And so we kind of get this interesting reenactment. It's actually kind of a fun aspect of the episode, but it also plays a really interesting element to it because we kind of run down everything. And for one, we end up finding out Ryan was there because it is the kind of messed up thing of like, oh yeah, like, because he ends up admitting like he was here to see George. And I even love Laura being like, really? Come on, your wife was outside. He was like, I didn't know she was actually going to be here, show up with this whole situation. Because it turns out he was here trying to he was actually going to make a deal, like, cause kind of making deals behind his dad's back without him really knowing. He was actually going to make a deal with Owen Marvin, but Owen didn't show up. Now I'm wondering, is there something to that? Like why Owen didn't show up? That'd be kind of interesting questions to kind of find out later on why Owen didn't show up for that meeting. Because I don't think Owen said anything about that previously, that the fact is that he was going to be there, that like in this entire investigation he's never brought that up. He'll probably make the argument, well, you didn't ask, so I didn't bother telling. I didn't think it was important. So, but obviously like the kind of like the intricacies of like running back through like everything that went down that night. It's like, okay, so obviously it had to be the food, in particular it had to be the salad, because that's what was given to Tiffany, so it had to be that food. But then they kind of run through it because at one point there was a moment where like neither George, Nancy, Ace, or Bess were in the kitchen. So there was a moment of time, like at least a minute, where the food was unattended, that someone could have gotten to the food and poisoned it. And then it's kind of like, okay, so like, you know, trying to understand like what ended up happening. And it was a really interesting turn of events. And it turns out like the salad was originally given to Ryan, but Ryan didn't want it because there was dressing on it. George takes it back. Ace just assumed Bess messed up and put it on her own plate, and put it on a plate to give it to Tiffany. And then it kind of pieces together. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That was the moment like, holy shit. The salad, the poison wasn't meant for Tiffany. She was a casualty in this. Ryan was the actual target. I was like, dude, like just when you think you got the investigation figured out, we flipped it right on the test. I was like, that's so interesting. And the sad part is like, cause you see both Ace, George, and Bess all take this to heart because it's like they start blaming themselves. Because I think even Nancy, but Nancy's so caught up in the investigation. But it's the thing of like blame themselves because, you know, George was so distracted by, you know, dealing, you know, she had to deal with the fact is that Ryan was there. Not only was Ryan there, he was also there with his wife. So that made things complicated. But it's, you know, on top of that, you know, Bess was, you know, because she dropped the glasses and everything, and Ace blames himself because he's like, I made that mistake. Like, it's each one of them kind of blaming themselves about, like, you know, it's like, oh, it's on us, which Nick, it's like, no, it's not. Like, don't take the fault for this. This was someone else. This is whoever killed Tiffany. This was on her. So we can't be blaming ourselves, blaming on the killer. We got to get justice for her. And it's so interesting because, like, you know, Nick brings up a good point. Someone was going to die that night regardless. It was either going to be Ryan, but sadly, because of just, you know, fate being the fickle, well, thing that it is, it ends up, you know, ended up going to Tiffany. And it's just like, that's what's so crazy to me to think, like, this entire investigation, like, it's a Ryan was the target the entire time. And it's like, you know, like I said, someone would have died. It would have either been Ryan or it would have been Tiffany. So there was no way around it. They probably would have still felt guilty, but they feel even more guilty because, like, Tiffany wasn't even the original target. So that changes the entire investigation because it's like, we've been going about this the wrong way. But then Nancy was like, yeah, it's like, obviously this wasn't about business because you were already kind of ruining the Hudson family business because by the time, like, you showed up here and everything, you were kind of losing the business money. So it's like, okay. So then, like, obviously Nancy shows Ryan a photo. Obviously he doesn't, like, he knows bits and pieces about Lucy haunting him, but he doesn't quite grasp it and understand because he's kind of denying it because he's the one that's had experiences with it. But obviously, like, our group, our main heroes have been the ones that have mainly dealt with the investigation, have dealt with the supernatural side of it. So she starts investigating. She's following, like, the signal, like the scrambled screen, and it's like, okay, kind of pointing her in the right direction. And it goes by near the window and she hears it, and it's like, she pieces it together. That's how the killer found out about what Ryan wanted. So it's like that he got the salad, but then it's like, that's what she kind of circles it back. This is why Lucy's death connects to Tiffany's, because this whole thing was retribution because you killed Lucy and they're trying to get revenge. Or he's like, what? No, I didn't. But then Nancy kind of gives him the emails and everything, and he's like, I didn't write. And she's like, oh, you didn't write it? And you see Lucy screaming at him because what I think it is, I believe Lucy probably thinks because I think even in death, she doesn't know the full scale of everything either. I think she only knows what she knows, and there's crossover here and there. But I think she, much like her brother, we'll get to that soon enough, blames Ryan, but I don't think Ryan wrote those letters because easily all you needed was access to a computer and his email, and it could have been, you know, someone could easily have faked that to draw him out because, like, well, because we know that Lucy came across the fact is that Sebastian and Ryan's mom, what's her name, Cecile, were having an affair. Like, we know that she discovered that, but the fact of the matter is, it did seem like even the last time Lucy and Ryan saw each other in the confines of, like, that party and everything, like present day, when he saw her ghost and everything, they were making out and they were together. Like, so that's why I'm kind of like, I don't know whether that was a scream of just anguish of, like, you're not getting it, or maybe she still is blaming him. I don't know. Maybe her negativity is kind of feeding off her brother because, like, Nancy, because Ace created a code to follow the emails and she followed it back to the computer at the workshop, and I was like, her brother is behind this because he thinks Ryan killed Lucy. And because he was like, yeah, because I was like, whoever it was that tried to kill Ryan had to have access to those emails, but they didn't realize that someone potentially had faked him. So, but basically, that's what this was all about. Like, he ended up getting revenge because it's like his sister was so brokenhearted about it. And so for him, he's been trying to get justice. That's why he was so, like, sure, it's like, oh, like, Carson didn't kill my sister, because he believes this entire time that it was Ryan who did it. That's what this was all about. And I was like, that's such a sad, interesting turn of events. Sadly, Josh trying to cover his tracks to try to kill Nancy. Set of circumstances led to him falling back on the hook, getting stuck, knocking over in a bucket of water, and there was an exposed wire, and then electrocuting himself. I was like, oh, that was brutal. I don't know why, like, it's certain deaths and stuff like that. Once again, I keep forgetting Supernatural exists on this network, so there are certain lanes with, like, depths and stuff they can go down. I just wasn't expecting them to show him burning it like that. You know what's actually interesting? The actor who plays Josh, he was in, I could be remembering wrong, didn't he play a killer in Frequency, or at least he was kind of a suspect killer? I don't remember if he actually was one, because it's been a while, but it was just kind of interesting when you think about him kind of being a bad guy in this as well. But that kind of like, okay, but, you know, the police show up and everything. But even like Nancy was like, but how did he get a hold of the poison? She's like, that doesn't make any sense because no one around here. Like, that's the thing. I was like, huh. Because what's interesting too is Patrice had made up this, like, she had talked to Nick a little bit, and she was like, you know, there was this interesting thing of like, you know, she was like, do you know the secret of our family? And Nick was like, no. And she's like, okay, good. I'm like, what kind of secret does it, you know, that family have? And I'm like, what was she referencing at that time? Maybe I'm assuming it has to have something to do with Lucy potentially. Why she, you know, like what was that about? That was just like a quick scene in the episode, but I'm like, what the hell is that about? But by the time they come back, it's like, oh no, he's not dead. He's super alive. He managed to get away. So like now he's free. I mean, granted, he's gonna be hunted down for like, you know, being the one that tried to kill Ryan, but ended up killing Tiffany. So there's that. But for me, it's like, because at first I was like, because this is back in early 2000s, so I don't know if you can necessarily do something as intricate as like hiding your IP. I mean, you probably could even back then, just depending on how good of a hacker you are. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think the person needed to hack. They probably just needed to, because that's why the message got deleted, because whoever it was that was writing that message didn't want Ryan to find out that a message was being sent, and it was like, oh, they were trying to cover their tracks. I'm fully certain it had to be his mom out of anyone, because once again, whatever Lucy's situation was, it's like, you know, it pertains to that. And I think the only person that would talk to and about Lucy like that would be someone in Ryan's family. Not unless this kind of ties into Owen, because the only person that would have access to like Ryan's email like that would be his mom. You know, he was a teenager at the time, so it's like that kind of pieces together. So it's like, okay. So that's kind of one potential side of the puzzle. We'll kind of have to wait. But I think Ryan figured that out, because the moment he was like, I didn't write, and I think he kind of pieced it together. Like, if it wasn't me, I know exactly who it might be. You know, also he was being scared off by Lucy, but it's like, obviously Nancy kind of thinks she's got to figure out. But once again, how did, you know, because she was like, that poison is super rare. So it's like, how did Josh come across something like that? And how did he come across it like such last minute? Like, obviously he had to have been thinking about it and planning it, but someone had to be helping him come up and concoct that. So someone else was trying to, it might be a combination of, I would assume this might have something to do with Owen, because notice who didn't show up. Because obviously Owen's got a vendetta against the Hudson family because of his uncle Sebastian. So that's where I'm immediately like, okay, so it had to be a thing of Owen had to have been working with Josh. You know, sadly, like, you know, the Sable family is literally caught between a war between these two. Because that's why I think Owen set that whole situation up to be there specifically. It's going to be, you know, because like, once again, that's an answer to this thing we didn't get. Why was Owen the only one who didn't show up? Once again, he never referenced the fact is that with all that's going on, he never referenced that meeting at all. So that's something Nancy's going to have to question him about. But the other avenues to this whole situation is the whole Lisbeth situation, because obviously, you know, Bess is caught between like, oh, she's supposed to meet up with Amaya, but she actually accidentally sends the wrong text. That something that was meant for Lisbeth, she sent to Amaya, and now it's a complicated thing of like, oh, you know, because even Laura was like, oh, maybe subconsciously you want to send to her instead of the girl that you're actually dating. But, you know, George kind of snapped at her a little bit, but that's because obviously George knows what it's like to be in that complicated situation of like, you know, a very complicated relationship. And it's like, it's easier to kind of, you know, lean more towards the unknown rather than kind of taking the time to really push for it with what's known. So it's like, don't do that. Like, if, you know, kind of, and, you know, Bess is like, you're right. I'm going to set the record straight with Amaya, kind of let her know where things stand. And if she can't, you know, accept that, then who cares what, you know, my aunt wants? I'm going to cut the thread because she obviously cares very deeply for Elizabeth. But obviously, you had Bess being like, kind of take your own advice. And George was like, I don't know, I'm not going back with Ryan. It's like, no, obviously you like Nick. The fact is, Nick and Nancy are no longer together. You don't have to feel bad about how you feel. It's like she totally, because you could tell too when she was quoting stuff, she's like, oh, like Nick coming up with this kind of, I think it's that thing where like George, to kind of like hide the fact is that she kind of likes someone. I think she kind of like, she goes, I guess you can almost want to use anime terms. I think she goes a little tsundere just to kind of hide the fact is that she's kind of into Nick. Like, it's already being pretty clear. Even Nancy's kind of picked up on it. So, but I'm curious to see what George kind of does. But another element to this is, Laura is planning on going to, Paris, and she wants Ace to come with her. The entire episode, Ace is reluctant to talk about it. But, but I did like what Nick was saying. Like, the fact of the matter is, you both owe it to yourselves. Like, it's like, don't half-ass anything. Because Ace was like, maybe I'll, come visit her and stuff like that. Because even she was like, no, don't come visit, come stay, live with me in Paris. You have no reason to stay behind, especially like when the investigation's kind of done and everything. But, Nick was like, you both deserve, like, not half-assing this. So, don't kind of keep her hung up on waiting on a maybe, and you don't deserve that either. So Ace ends up telling her, he's like, he feels like he's got a calling here, that this is where he's supposed to be, so he can't leave. And, and Laura kind of already felt like that too a little bit. So both of them kind of, they found their way to each other after all this time, and just to kind of lose each other again, which is sad. But, it's like, this is where Ace feels like he's needed and necessary, So once again, he kind of found his calling, and I think all this whole investigative stuff too. So, like I said, some interesting developments. I am very, very curious to see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good